Recorded live.
Hello, America, and hello, nuclear aficionados around the world. Welcome to Nuclear.com Daily. I'm Steve Schulen of Nuclear.com. It's a pleasure and an honor to be part of your day. Here in the United States, this is President's Day, February 17th, 2014. And as always, the news is chock full of things nuclear and nuclear related. One of the stories that has been making the rounds worldwide is about on Friday, some high um, air monitor readings at the Waste Isolation Pilot Project underground. Um, they're near Carlsbad, New Mexico. Um, Apparently, the highest airborne readings that they've ever seen there. Um, they have had in the past elevated readings on these same kinds of monitors underground um, that were due to either equipment malfunctions or later ascertained to be due to natural radon increases in radon activity, which happens all the time. You know, my background is as a radiation protection technician at commercial nuclear power plants. And in my years of working at the power plants, taking air samples, counting air samples, recounting them after a period of time to ascertain whether they were longer lived isotopes of concern or whether they were the very short term, rapidly decaying natural um, activity, radon products. Um, I know that this is not something to get your underwear bunched up about, but you do want to follow it up and make sure that you're taking appropriate precautions until you find out what it is that you're dealing with. Um, and that apparently is exactly what they did at the Waste Isolation Pilot Project. There were no people underground um, when the alarms occurred, and they kept people out until they have a chance to figure out what's going on. Um, they took contamination surveys above ground, found nothing. Um, Now, I would think that they'd be able to decay count um, the samples, but maybe, I would think that they'd send someone down to pull a grab sample that you could take off to a remote counting station um, and measure the radioactive decay. And like I say, this happened Friday. We should have heard something by now. But instead, what we've heard is some really alarmist stuff. Let me take a look. There was one article that caught my eye. uh, it came out earlier today. It was oh gosh, let me see here. The was a Russian story. Here it is. It's um, actually it's out of Iran, but they're citing a Russian source. This is from the Iranian propaganda news service, the Fars News Agency, and they called it "Catastrophic Nuclear Event Prompts New Mexico Evacuation Fears." Well, I guess uh, I guess it's no surprise to see downright lies. This is such a total lie, the way they're describing it. But they do cite Rosatom report in the top paragraph, a grim quote of special importance, unquote, that means highest classification level, report prepared by the Russian State Atomic Energy Corporation, Rosatom, circulating in the Kremlin, warned that the, quote, potentially catastrophic nuclear event, unquote, currently unfolding at the U.S. Atomic Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, WIPP, near Carlsbad, New Mexico, has prompted the White House to begin pre-staging government forces and equipment in the event a large-scale evacuation is needed. According to this report, the United States Department of Energy's WIPP is the world's third deep geological repository after closure of Germany's repository for radioactive waste at Morsleben and the Schracht Ass-2 salt mine, licensed to permanently dispose of transuranic radioactive waste for 10,000 years, that's left from the research and production of nuclear weapons. And they cite a website, whatdoesitmean.com, as reporting on this. A highly significant portion of the nuclear waste being stored at the Waste Isolation Pilot Project, this report continues, was the result of the recently completed 1993 highly enriched uranium purchase agreement between the United States and Russia that saw 500 metric tons of highly enriched uranium from nuclear weapons downblended into low-enriched uranium and then sent to America, where it was made into fuel for nuclear power plants. And they quote Secretary Moniz, U.S. Energy Secretary Ernest Moniz, as stating, for 2 decades, 1 in 10 light bulbs in America has been powered by nuclear material from Russian nuclear warheads. Critical to note, however, this report says, is that the United States Enrichment Corporation, USEC, the private American corporation serving as executive agent for the highly enriched uranium purchase agreement, was, quote, deliberately targeted, unquote, for elimination by the Obama administration in early 2009, leading to its December 16, 2013 announcement that it had reached an agreement with the majority of its debt holders to file a prearranged and voluntary Chapter 11 bankruptcy restructuring in the first quarter of 2014. So they're saying USEC was targeted for elimination by the Obama administration. So the Russians would say Obama is not just having a war on coal, but also having a war on USEC. The article continues, Federal Security Service, FSB intelligence experts contributing to this report say the U.S. wanted to eliminate USEC to divert highly enriched uranium purchase agreement uranium for the purpose of reconstituting it to its highly dangerous uranium-235 level to conduct experiments at the Waste Isolation Pilot Project on what is called nuclear saltwater rockets, which is a proposed type of nuclear thermal rocket designed by Robert Zubrin that would be fueled by water-bearing dissolved salts of plutonium, or U-235. Under tight strictures put upon it by U.S. law, this report says, the White House needed Russia's highly enriched uranium purchase agreement uranium for these nuclear saltwater rocket experiments. And then they say something about it's not reportable. On February 5th, however, this report continues, 3 NSWR experiments at WIPP went horrifically wrong, leading to an explosion and fire at the underground facility, followed by the February 14th radiological event that prompted its full evacuation. Of the greatest concern to Russian nuclear experts, this report says, is the U.S. conducting these NSWR experiments at the WIPP facility in the first place, as nearly the entire Carlsbad, New Mexico region is in danger of collapsing due to the massive sinkholes appearing over these areas. Vast underground salt domes. See CNN video news report below. So the greatest concern to Russian nuclear experts is not the United States making some kind of new kind of nuclear thermal rocket, but their greatest concern is for the Carlsbad, New Mexico region. Isn't that believable? Even worse, this report continues, are reports coming from New Mexico that their drought-stricken farmers are selling massive amounts of water to oil and gas industry frackers, draining their aquifer, and which has led to even more destabilization of the WIPP underground facility. This is serious to note, the report says, because many scientists for decades have considered salt to have serious deficiencies in comparison to some other geological formations for spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste, because such heat-generating waste can rapidly deform the rock and create instability that could endanger workers and release radioactivity. Now, I'd just like to mention that WIPP is transuranic waste. It is not spent nuclear fuel, and it's not high-level waste. It's something that you want to treat as carefully as you treat high-level waste, but it is not high-level waste. So why are they bringing that up? In addition, the WIPP site is surrounded by active oil and natural gas production facilities, and reserves underlie the waste disposal area, the mining of which could result in breaches and releases of radioactivity. Pressurized brine reservoirs also underlie the waste disposal area, which could result in waste being transported to the surface if a pathway is created by mining or other means. Further to be noted about this ongoing nuclear catastrophe, this report says, was the U.S. Federal Emergency Management Agency emergency notice this past week that it is looking to spend millions on manufactured homes that can be quickly built and deployed to any state in America, which also have the, quote, added potential to become permanent housing. So why is that further to be noted about this ongoing nuclear catastrophe? I don't know. Because if there's room to print, they will do it. For the American people themselves, who this week were named as, quote, the most drugged people in the history of the planet, unquote, who may potentially resist the administration's forced evacuation, this report warns, the U.S. Army was reported this week to have built a 300-acre fake city complete with a sports stadium, bank, school, and an underground subway so that their soldiers can learn new ways on how to deal with them. Well, Iran pulls out all the stops here. First of all, they say there's been a catastrophic accident due to this experimental work on some kind of a rocket that uses dissolved plutonium or U-235. And then they talk about all kinds of other problems there in New Mexico related to oil and gas production. And then they talk about U.S. people being the most drugged people in the history of the planet. Interesting. I'd like to see that comparison. I seem to recall the period in China when opium was rampant. Like right now, life expectancy in Russia for Russian men is very low because of their use of alcohol to excess. Anyway, so all these drug people may potentially resist the administration's forced evacuation. I don't know. I don't think it's the drug people that are going to be resisting. But who knows? Anyway, so that's how apparently the Russians and the Iranians take advantage of this this elevated reading of radioactivity, something which has happened before. It turned out to be radon or equipment malfunction. They're saying this time it's different. This time it is a, quote, catastrophic nuclear event. I recall a quote from Thomas Jefferson. It said that the man that reads no newspapers is oftentimes better informed than one who reads them all, because there's so many mistakes in what is reported. All right, let's go to the latest update that I have. Let's see, we got the El Paso Times. Let's take a look at that one. Radiation leak detected at WIPP. By Zach Ponce of the Current Argus. That's a New Mexico based newspaper. This is updated last night. Oh, wait a minute. This is February 15th. It just came through on the American Nuclear Services News Wire, which is a more overpowered device. Let's see if they have a more recent story on that. They're at the El Paso Times. Probably not. I should probably go to the Current Argus site, eh? Oh, let's do that. Current Argus. CurrentArgus.com. Let's take a little while to load. Well, it doesn't even make it into their hot topics. And they just have a link to that story from the 15th, it looks like. Oh, yeah, it's not loading so well. All right, well, I'm going to leave that. Let's go to the Nuclear Energy Institute's email today. Top story, Marv Fertel, the president and CEO of Nuclear Energy Institute, says some energy market designs have shifted against nuclear. The flawed energy marketplace may cause more U.S. nuclear plants to shut down unless something is done, said Fertel. Low natural gas prices are proving challenging for nuclear facility operators. Quote, there's something wrong with the design and operation of the markets in which they are operating. They do not value the baseload capacity that can be dispatched when needed. They do not provide value for fuel and technology diversity. I think they meant fuel and technology diversity. No, all the markets value are what's cheapest. Next, an earthquake story based in South Carolina. But the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reports Plant Vogel suffers no damage from earthquake. Vogel being in Georgia, about 25 miles from Augusta, is where the earthquake was centered, a 4.1 magnitude earthquake. They have a quote from Georgia Power spokesman Brian Green. The plant is built in a robust manner to withstand seismic activity and shock absorption. It doesn't have any issues. The plant is operating at 100%. And yes, you would not expect a 4.1 magnitude earthquake approximately 25 miles from the site to cause any significant problems. Next, nuclear plays an important role in cutting emissions, Whitman says. Another CO2 climate alarmist. The fight against global warming should consider the inclusion of nuclear power, said Christine Todd Whitman, who's now the co-chair of the Clean and Safe Energy Coalition. Quote, it's not a silver bullet that will solve our energy problems, but if you care about clean air and heavy dependence on fossil fuels, nuclear should be part of the overall consideration, she said. Nuclear energy will help us address issues of air quality and greenhouse gases, and we need safe, reliable, affordable power. Well, I'll tell you what. I'm really disappointed that our industry, big players in our industry, appear to be hyping this CO2 climate alarmism. I've read a story or a headline that Drudge had today about Secretary of State John Kerry being in Air Force Two or whatever it's called, whatever the plane is called when it carries the vice president, from Indonesia, and he apparently went through a dust cloud from a volcanic dust cloud. I saw a picture of the plane that looked really filthy. Anyway, he was blaming the volcano on climate change, and he was lambasting what he called climate change deniers. And he's as big a liar as the Iranians, ladies and gentlemen, just the language that he uses. This notion that people are climate change deniers is ridiculous. I, for example, give not a whit of credence to the shoddy science, or because of the shoddy science that underlies this alarmist CO2 climate change claims. But I do not deny climate change. As a matter of fact, I think the phrase is redundant because change is what climate does naturally. And I see no evidence that the kinds of portrayals as described in like the hockey stick graph from these multi-proxy studies, I see no evidence that there's anything going on that hasn't been repeated over the years uh, through Mother Nature. Before the first coal was burned as an industrial fuel, before the Industrial Revolution, before the first car was ever driven, we had these same kinds of fluctuations. Now you see a wide range of these what they call multi-proxy studies that show a very uh, flat part of the graph going back before the Industrial Revolution, and then a tremendous increase in more recent years. Ladies and gentlemen, they are comparing apples to oranges. These multi-proxy studies, when you're talking about oh, um, tree rings, um, sediment cores, ice ice cores. Um, as you go further back in time, the dating error grows, and when you combine multiple data, each with their own unique um, dating error, um, you inherently tend to smear away the variability. And so it's not surprising that these multi-proxy studies consistently come up with a very flat stick as you go back in time. Um, but the conclusions that they draw from that the latter part of the 20th century um, was quite exceptional in terms of climate history. It's just it's it's a lie, and they know it's a lie. What they're doing is they've come to the conclusion that all else being equal, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, and we're massively increasing the amount of carbon dioxide um, being emitted, um, and we're very concerned about that, and they're willing to lie to you because they're concerned, and well, they're educated, they're the elite. Their opinion should count more than data. Well, that's a very unscientific approach. Um, but that, my friends, is what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change does. That's what Michael Mann of Penn State University does. And many, many, many more folks who are pretty much household names because of the CO2 climate scare. Billions of dollars has been funneled into what used to be considered a backwater of scientific community. Climatology it's always been a fascinating subject and drawn many bright people to it. But up until this recent concern about the potential effects of CO2, um, climate science was indeed a backwater. And you could read, a climatologist could read all the journal articles published in the field, um, but that was 20 years ago. Now there are literally thousands of new articles every year, journals being created to handle the publishing of all the folks getting all these grants. Much of the stuff is, as Richard Lindzen has described it, no better than childhood exercises um, in fantasy. Um, he didn't put the fantasy in there, but he did talk about childhood exercises. He was talking about the modeling runs and the many papers that are predicting impacts from projected changes in global mean temperature and the implications of that on the local places where weather actually occurs. And climate is the average weather. Anyway, so I was really disappointed that Secretary of State John Kerry talked about climate change deniers and equated them to the Flat Earth Society. Mr. Kerry, you lying disgrace of a public official. I do not deny climate change. As a matter of fact, it is the people that you are treating as if their recommendations have a whit of credence to them. They are the deniers. They're not denying anthropogenic climate change due to CO2. They are denying natural climate change. I recall a paper, it hadn't been too long ago, maybe 10 years ago, where it was going into the attribution of climate change. And it was looking at the expert judgments that the IPCC brought to this matter. And it concluded that the dominant perspective amongst the attribution scientists was that any variation in global mean temperature is out of the ordinary. They allow zero climate change when they're comparing their different forcing mechanisms. And ladies and gentlemen, that's denying climate change, natural climate change. They are the deniers. And I must say, that word denial is quite charged emotionally. That's why they use it. Because if they may not know squat about science, but they know a lot about propaganda. And, when they talk about denialists, they're putting them in the same category as the Holocaust deniers. And nothing could be further from the truth than to cast aspersions on folks who recognize that these alarmist claims, even though Barack Obama and his fellow travelers will tell you that the science is settled, they're lying to you. That's it, plain and simple. Ladies and gentlemen, nuclear power is the safest way to generate a lot of electricity, even without giving a whit of credence to this CO2 advantage that nuclear has, because you're not burning the fossil fuels. There is no CO2 released from the actual fission of nuclear fuel. But, CO2, it is not the boogeyman. There's much worse things. As a matter of fact, CO2, in many ways, is properly considered the elixir of life. To quote a very old scientist, for scientists to live longer ago. All right, well, those were the two main stories, CO2 and whatnot. And I think I'm going to go ahead and take this call. Hope you have a great day. This is Steve Sheelan signing off for Nuclear.com Daily.